Prithvi Shantirantariksha Shantir Dyav Shantir Disha Shantiravantara Disha Shantiragni Shantir Vayu Shantiraditya Shantish Chandrama Shantir Nakshatrani Shantirapa Shantiroshadaya Shantir Vanaspataya Shantir Gau Shantiraja Shantirashva Shantir Purusha Shantir Brahma Shantir Brahmana Shantir Shantireva Shanti Shantirme Astu Shantihi. May there be peace on earth and in the sky. May there be peace in the water and in all directions. May there be peace in the plants, in the trees, and in animals. May there be peace in the hearts of all beings. May there be peace in everyone and in everything. Sarvetra sukhinas santu, sarve santu niramayaha, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschit dukkha bhag bhavet, sarvastaratu durgani, sarvo bhadrani pashyatu, sarvas sadbuddhimapnotu, sarvas sarvatra nandatu. May all be happy and healthy. May all see what is good, and may no one experience misery. May all overcome their obstacles and acquire good tendencies. May people everywhere find joy and fulfillment. Let us now spend some time touching the center of peace and joy in our hearts. A good way to begin the practice is to withdraw the scattered energies of the mind and bring them to rest on one point. That point can be our own breathing. Let us therefore practice breathing with awareness. As we breathe in, let us visualize that our body and mind are being filled with love, strength, and compassion. And as we breathe out, let us release all the stress, anxiety, and exhaustion in the body and mind. Let us practice this way for a while. Let us now turn our attention to the region of our heart. Although God is present everywhere and in everyone, the divine presence can be felt most clearly in our own hearts. We can meditate in any way we have been taught. To remain focused, we can take the help of a short mental prayer or a mantra or a divine name. Let us now spend some time dwelling on the presence of God in our hearts. Om Asatoma Satkamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Aviravirmayedhi Rudrayate Dakshinam Mukham Tenamam Pahi Nityam. May the Divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the Divine consciousness fill our hearts and protect us. So we'll continue with our study of the Amritabindu. So we saw some important points in the Upanishad last week. First was about purity of mind. This is the phrase that often gets used in spiritual texts. What is a pure mind and what is an impure mind? And what I like about this Upanishad is that it says what it has to say in unmistakable terms. It's very direct and very straightforward. So in the very first verse, the Upanishad said, there are two kinds of minds, pure and impure. And a very simple definition. The impure mind is one that is filled with desires, and pure mind is one that is free from desires. That's the general definition. Now, desires themselves, we know, are not all same. So, the desires that help me realize my true nature, the desires that help me become free, the desire for freedom itself is not in itself a bad desire. But as long as that desire is present in the mind is still strong. So, while the mind that is free from desires is pure, the way to reach that pure mind is not through removing the desires from the mind totally, although theoretically that's what we have to do, but practically what we have to do is strengthen the good desires that we have. By good desires is meant those desires that will take me nearer to God, nearer to the Spirit, and weaken the desires that will take me away from my spiritual goal. And strengthening and weakening them simply means whenever any negative desires comes in the heart, I must say a positive no, a very firm no to it. And every time a positive desire, by positive I mean something that will take me nearer to my spiritual goal, I must say yes. So the intermediate step to eliminating all desires is first to strengthen our positive desires or spiritual desires, if you like, and weaken. Now, what do I mean by strengthen and weaken? It's simply this. We will not go into the details, but this is something we have discussed several times before, that every time I say yes to a desire, it gets stronger. Because a yes means I'm going to translate that desire into intention and later into action. And every time any action is done, it creates an additional impression. So the more I say yes to these positive strengthening desires in my heart, the more the impressions, the more the positive samskaras are generated. And the more the impressions are created, more similar desires will come. So it's a kind of self-propagating mechanism. If I want more positive desires, then I have to keep on saying yes to whatever positive desires come in my heart. Contrarily, every time a negative desires comes in the heart, something, and by negative in general, I would say anything that will make me weak, either physically, mentally, emotionally, intellectually, spiritually, anything that will make me weak, I should be able to say no. And when I say no to a desire, that desire won't be translated into action, and therefore it kind of becomes weaker. So every time I say no to something, it gets weak, partly because I'm not generating a fresh impression. And every time I say yes to something, I'm creating an additional impression. So that's the process. Ultimately, we have to be free from all desires. Only then the mind becomes completely pure. Negative desires have to be eliminated by a very positive no, by saying no to it. Then only when the good desires remain, I transcend those good desires. So you don't have to say no to good desires, you simply have to transcend them. And I said, to one question would be, why not just transcend them straight away? All of them, good and bad. Unfortunately, well, if it were possible, you could have eliminated this intermediate step. But that's not how it works. You cannot transcend a negative desire. You can only say no to it. You have to destroy it. You have to kill it, if you want to use a more violent language. The difference between killing something or saying no to something and transcending something is this. If a crime is committed, one will be punished for that one. You cannot say no to it. You cannot say, well, I'm transcending my jail sentence. You cannot. So you will be punished for it. On the other hand, if you are rewarded for something, you have the right. Nobody can force you to accept a reward. If you are rewarded for something, you can say, I don't want it. And there are instances, people when they win an award or something as a matter of protest or for whatever reason, they will say, I don't want it. And it's okay. So that's the thing. So bad desires create more bondage, and that will ultimately lead to pain and suffering. And I have to experience it. I have to suffer for it. But good desires, I don't have to enjoy them. A good desire, if it comes, it's like you're getting a reward. And then if you have sufficient spirit of detachment, you can say, well, it's a little bit like you go and help someone. And then that person is so grateful to you. The person says, come, I would like to take you out for dinner because you have been so helpful. You don't have to. You can say, that's fine. Thank you for invitation, but I don't want it. And that's okay. But it's not okay if you do something bad and you say, No, I don't want punishment. It doesn't work that way. So that's the difference between good and bad desires. So, pure mind, impure mind. Mind with desires, impure. Without desires, pure. To reach the point of without desires, you have the interim step of positively cultivating good spiritual desires and saying no to anything that takes me away from God. Then in the second verse, we saw how everything is in the mind. The bondage is in the mind, the freedom is in the mind. And therefore, the more my mind is attached to the perishable things of this material world, the more bondage I am in. And the more I'm able to free myself from this clinging to perishable things, the more free I become. So both. Remember, in spirit, there is neither bondage nor freedom. The spirit is beyond all these pairs of opposites. So the bondage that we experience is only in matter, and both the body and mind are material. And then, of course, the third verse, which we saw last time, says that freedom comes to the mind that is detached from sense objects. Whoever longs for freedom should always seek to detach the mind from sense objects. And in this context, we saw that there are two things we can do. What does this detachment imply? That in any situation, I can ask one or the other of this or both of these things. First, through every experience I get in life, I can ask, what do I learn from it? Everything that happens in our life is meant to teach us something. And if I learn the lesson, it won't bother me. But every time I refuse to learn the lesson, life will keep on hitting us, and we'll just have to keep on getting hammered by life until we learn the lesson. The second thing we can do is, how can I help? If it's possible for me to ease the situation in some way, I may not be suffering, but if I see that it's possible for me to help others in some way, then I should be able to do it. So these are the two ways of detaching. Detachment is primarily a detachment from one's own ego. And so the more I think of others and less of myself, that accomplishes that detachment in a very smooth way. So this was a quick summary of the first three verses. Now let's read verse number 4. Nirasta Vishaya Sangam Sanniruddham Manohridi Yada Yatyatmano Bhavam Tada Tat Paramam Padam. The true self, Atman, is realized when the mind's attachment to sense objects is destroyed and it is fully controlled in the heart. That is the supreme state. So, attachment to sense objects is pretty straightforward and clear. It doesn't need too much explanation. So, the more I'm attached to sense objects which are perishable, the more the mind is in bondage. Now, when that attachment is destroyed, the mind gets controlled in the heart. Now, very quickly, these are the terms we find occurring in many spiritual texts: mind, heart. And so it's good to have a general idea of what is being said here. The most popular of the heart is the heart that pumps blood, and where the it's the pumping of the blood that occurs, and that's the physiological heart. And there are heart specialists, and we know it's a part of the body that we have. Now, obviously, that's not the heart that is referred to here. So, if you thought you had only one heart, you think again. One way of looking at it is we probably have at least three hearts. One of which is the physiological heart, which does the pumping of the blood. The second heart is the emotional heart, the heart at the seat of emotions. And sometimes we see that when we feel very emotional, there's a kind of you feel some movement. It's pretty much in the same area. And then that is how the language also developed when people speak about with a heavy heart. So again, with the intense grief, sometimes you feel actually even kind of a physical sensation, a kind of heaviness in this area. Or with a light heart. Sometimes when you're in great joy, you feel a kind of a different sensation in the heart. There was one Hindi movie, it had come some years ago. I think it was Kuch Kuch Hota Hai in Hindi, which really means there's something that happens here. So we know that with different emotions that occur in the heart, we have some kind of a feeling. You may not always be able to describe it, but something happens in this area. Now that is the second heart we have, the heart as the seat of emotions. Now, the mind, as we generally speak about the mind, in Vedanta sometimes it is said that the mind has four distinct functions. One is the mind that cogitates, weighs the pros and cons of any situation. And that is called the mind. So mind is a generic term, but if you look at the functions of the mind, that part of the mind which weighs the pros and cons is in Sanskrit, manaha, let's go. So then there is the second function of the mind, which is the determinative faculty. When you have these pros and cons, ultimately the mind then makes a choice. It chooses this or chooses that which determines the course of action. And that is sometimes called in Sanskrit buddhi, often gets translated as the intellect. Again, sometimes the way we use the terms in English may not exactly tally with this definition, but just you can have a general idea that the different functions that the mind does, when it weighs the pros and cons, it is called the mind. When it then determines something, decides to do something, it's called buddhi. Now, the mind also gives us a sense of I as someone. The sense of I that we get is, of course, popularly called ego. In Sanskrit, it's called ahankara. Aham is I. Kara, that which creates that I, aham. And a fourth function of the mind is to act as a kind of receptacle, a kind of a container in which all the impressions, memories, thoughts remain. So that is sometimes called in Sanskrit a chitta. Now, don't think of mind as some kind of a entity with four compartments. It's not like that. It's what it is very difficult to say since it doesn't have a definite form. At least not a form that we can see. We cannot say it's formless. Philosophically, you cannot say it's formless because it is still material. And if it's material, it is still finite. It's limited. It's not infinite. But it has these four distinct functions. Now, the emotional function of the heart, of the mind. So again, there are yet another way of understanding the functions of the mind is one is the affective function of the mind. That is where mind is the seat of emotions. Then there is the cognitive function of the mind. That is the mind which does reasoning, which reasons things, reasons it out. So mind is the seat of emotions and feelings. Then that function of the mind which reasons things out, applies logic and so on. And the third function of the mind is the willpower, ichha shakti. So these are again the different ways of understanding what is happening in the mind is through either reasoning, through emotions, and through the will, the power of the will. Now, oftentimes, the feeling part, the emotions and feelings part of the mind also gets called as a heart. So people say with a heavy heart. I just feel, when we even feel very emotional, we kind of feel something here. Again, so it's in somewhere in this area. So this is kind of the heart zone, if you like. So physiological heart, the emotional heart happens to be somewhere here. But the heart that is spoken of in verse number 4, when the mind is fully controlled in the heart, is neither the physiological heart nor the emotional heart. It's the spiritual heart. That's why I said you probably have at least three hearts. For the body to continue functioning, your physiological heart should be functioning well. For the mind to be healthy, your emotional heart should be healthy. And for the spirit to be discovered, you have to find it in that spiritual heart. All that we know in general is that all these hearts are more or less in the same area. It's a little bit like sometimes when people call up and they want to visit the Vedanta Center, they have never been here before. And so they ask me, I would like to come, and where is it? And so the first thing I tell them, it's in Kenmore Square. Because Fenway, everyone has heard of Fenway, the Red Sox, so it's in this area. And then they will come closer, and then of course I say, well, you take this Bay State Road, and then I kind of give them more detailed instructions. It's a little bit like that. So this is the Kenmore area. If you want to find where the physical heart is, then you have to kind of go and find out. That's in general. So now when this verse says the mind is fully controlled in the heart, now that heart is really the spiritual heart. One of the challenges that we all face when we begin the practice of meditation is to discover that heart. So you know the area, but you haven't found the heart yet. That is why when in meditation we close our eyes, we see darkness. We are often told to meditate in the heart, look in the heart. We say nothing. Nothing, not because there is nothing, it's because I haven't discovered the place yet. I know the general area, but haven't found the place yet. And so often in the beginning stages of our meditation practice, it's not so much about seeing the object of your meditation, but it's actually finding out where my object of meditation is located. Locating the heart is the first step. Now, oftentimes in many of us, especially those amongst us who meditate on a theistic object of meditation, that is, the object of meditation, we have some Ishta Devata, a chosen deity, and often there is this emotional connection that we have with the chosen deity. Oftentimes when we try to meditate and we haven't discovered the spiritual heart yet, what often happens is that the emotional heart gets activated. And that's why sometimes when you're trying to meditate, you're not really seeing anything, but your love for your chosen deity, love for your Ishta, activates the emotional heart. And that's why sometimes people get very emotional during meditation. And that really means that emotional heart has gotten activated. Although that's not the topic of our present discussion, maybe later on this fall, when we take up a study of some devotional texts, we'll have more opportunity to see what this activating of emotional heart does, of how to purify the emotions, how to purify the heart. But we will not go to there now. Oftentimes, though, to the extent our emotions themselves are purified, the opening of the emotional heart may lead to the opening of the spiritual heart, though it's not a natural precursor to opening of the spiritual heart. Partly because our emotions haven't become purified yet. Yes, there are some great, good, positive, healthy emotions, but there are also several negative, destructive emotions. So our emotional life is a mixed bag, and that prevents. That's why. Well, let me put it this way, which is why it's helpful to keep our emotions under check until our emotions are completely purified. Because when emotions overpower us, we may do extremely wonderful things, or we may do extremely terrible things. And so it's good to have them under control so we know what we are wielding. Emotions are a great power. And if we don't have that power under control, the power can potentially do as much good as harm. And so so we have to use that power of emotions in a very responsible way. And the path of devotion, the path of bhakti, is really what teaches us how to use this power of emotions in a healthy, positive way, something that will help me or not hurt me. But beyond the emotional heart is the spiritual heart. And the primary way that spiritual heart gets opened is through purity of mind. And the very first verse pointed out that the purity means the more I minimize my desire. And as I explained earlier today, how minimizing the desire in the first stage would mean strengthening my positive God-centric desires and weakening the desires that take me to the perishable, self-destructive path of life. So when the mind's attachment to sense object is destroyed, the heart, the mind gets controlled in the heart means we become aware of the heart. The spiritual heart gets awakened. And when the spiritual heart gets awakened, it is then that when we are taught by our teachers, look in the heart and meditate. Now that spiritual heart is awakened, you will not see simply darkness. That is when we know where to look for the object of our meditation. And it's a whole different dimension. As I said, that all of these are in the same area, but this area is not too big. And so, but recognize the spiritual heart is in the same area, at least the way our mind thinks. But once you locate it, you will find that it's not so small. In fact, it can fill the whole universe. It's that big. It's a whole different dimension of space. Sometimes in devotional language, they say when little Krishna, the little child Krishna, as sometimes children do in India, you kind of leave them out into the courtyard, and the first thing children do is take anything and put it in the mouth. That's the only way to get knowledge about what that thing is. And so this little baby, there are lots of stories and songs and poems. So this little Krishna then puts a little bit of this mud in his mouth or something. And then the mother comes running, Yashoda, one who was to take care of him. And so she looks and says, "Open your mouth. I told you never to eat from there. Open your mouth." And then the little child opens his mouth, and the mother suddenly sees the whole universe inside the mouth. And then she realized, well, this is not an ordinary child. Now, apart from the mythical aspect of the story, I mentioned this only to show that, well, just a little child opening his mouth, you could see the whole universe. So it's a whole different dimension of space. So don't be very surprised if you say, well, think of the Lord in your heart. Well, my heart is so small and it's just filled with blood. No, so it's a different heart. So at least the one thing you will be satisfied to know, you have at least 3 hearts. And the more we are able to keep all these 3 hearts strong, the happier we will be. Verse number 5. Tavadeva nirodhavyam yavat ridigatam kshayam etadjnanancha dhyanancha shesho nyayascha vistaraha. The mind needs to be controlled only until it is merged in the heart. That is both knowledge and meditation. Everything else is arguments and verbiage. So the initial struggle for everyone who wants to meditate is to really focus in the heart. And all of us who have attempted meditation know how in the beginning it's a big struggle. First of all, close your eyes, you see darkness, and then you say, well, I have to look in the heart. So where is my heart? Sometimes it helps if you can kind of lightly touch your heart, so kind of you know which, the little physical sensation or which area to meditate on. But it's still darkness. And because we don't see anything, it's easy to get distracted. And so we say, well, if you can't see something, then at least think intensely. Think intensely of the object of your meditation. And oftentimes, it is this intense thinking matures into seeing. So meditation, in a strictest sense of the term, is not really thinking, because thinking needs effort. Meditation, in the truest sense of the term, is effortless. So as long as we are making effort, we can kind of call that meditation. But ideally, we could say, well, I'm trying to meditate. I'm trying to focus my mind. And when the mind gets focused effortlessly, then meditation kind of begins. So meditation is something, therefore, which cannot be done. Meditation is something that happens. What you can do is try to, with effort, focus your mind on the object of meditation. Now, it becomes so much easier to see. It's a little bit like sometimes the difference between if you are just speaking with someone over the phone or if you are speaking with someone over Skype or FaceTime. If you're speaking someone with over the phone, then, and you're just sitting near a window, it's so easy to get distracted. I mean, you can still carry on the conversation, but you're also seeing and doing a lot of other things. Sometimes you can, if you have a headset or something, you could be doing 100 other things while carrying on a conversation. You don't just sit there talking. But it's easy to get distracted with simply sound to help us. But if you're sitting with a Skype talk or on FaceTime, then it's much easier because you're really seeing the person you are conversing with. So in the beginning, it's kind of like a conversation over the phone. There is no Skype. The Skype isn't working yet. You're not really seeing anything. So it's easy to get distracted. At that time, what we need effort to keep our mind focused even if you're not seeing anything. And if you're not seeing anything, the next best thing you can do is imagine it. Now, imagination is of two kinds. Imagining the real and imagining the imaginary. So sometimes it's like you are speaking with your friend over the phone. You're not really seeing your friend, but you can imagine the friend. The friend is there, wherever that friend is, and you're speaking. You know the friend is there because you can able to hear the friend's voice. So you are imagining someone who is there. On the other hand, if I just pick up a phone and pretend I'm speaking, and there is no one at the other end, then I can only imagine, but I'm only imagining the imaginary. So when we try to meditate, even if we don't actually see the object of our meditation, we can imagine. But that imagination is not imagination of the imaginary, it's the imagination of the real. It's a little bit like, think about it this way. So you're having a Skype talk with someone, and suddenly the bandwidth is not enough, and you no longer see the visual. But you are still able to carry on an audio conversation because it requires less bandwidth. So you can imagine still, because you are speaking with a friend, you are seeing that friend on the screen of your computer, and now that visual is gone, but the sound continues, but you can still imagine the friend is sitting. And you are imagining real because you know the friend is sitting in front of the computer, just that the bandwidth is less. So when we meditate, it's a little bit like that. You are imagining the object of your meditation in the heart, but not because it's not just blind imagination. The object of meditation is in your heart. It's just that the bandwidth is not enough, if you like. And so that's the difference between imagining the imaginary and imagining the real. So it's this intellect or imagining it, effort using a visualization that eventually leads to actual perception. And so don't be worried that you're just kind of, because sometimes people think, oh, just imagination. No, it's not imagination. Well, it is imagination, but not imagination of the imaginary. It's imagination of the real. Only the bandwidth is full, you have a full internet access, then you see the spirit access, if you like. So that is the most important thing. Once that thing occurs, once I'm able to perceive, see, not imagine, once I'm actually able to see the divine, then, well, as this verse says, well, that is knowledge and that is meditation. Everything else is just a bunch of arguments and just endless talking. So spiritual life is such, we can keep on talking all our lives, we keep on reading books all our lives, but that will mean nothing unless and until I actually begin to see the reality. That is what Ramakrishna, Holy Mother, Vivekananda stressed, that religion is not simply about talking, it's not about reading, it's not even about simply believing in something. It's actual direct perception, directly seeing. Verse 6. Naiva chintyam nacha chintyam na chintyam chintyameva tat pakshapata vinirmuktam brahma sampadyate tada. The supreme state is neither to be thought of nor unworthy to be thought of. It should not be thought of, but should be thought of. Then occurs the attainment of Brahman, who is free from all bias. As you can see, this is the literal translation. So commentators then have tried to figure out, well, what is really being said? So the supreme state is neither to be thought of as pleasing to the mind, nor unworthy to be thought of as unpleasant to the mind. That's one way of understanding. That the supreme state is not pleasing to the mind in the sense it's not an object of your mind. Because you see a beautiful scenery, a beautiful sunrise or a sunset, it's very pleasing to the mind. But a sunrise or a sunset is an object of your perception. So it's not pleasing to the mind because the spirit is not an object of your perception. In fact, the mind is the object and the spirit is the subject. Not unworthy. Well, if you say, well, it's not worthy to be thought of, does it mean it's unworthy to be thought of? No, it's not unworthy in the sense that it is not unpleasant. One other way of looking at this would be the supreme state is neither to be thought of as graspable by the mind. The mind cannot grasp it. The mind is limited, and the supreme state, the supreme, is unlimited. You cannot grasp the infinite by the finite. Nor unworthy to be thought of as ungraspable by the mind. Now, that's the tricky part in Vedanta. The Vedantic texts say, Upanishads say, the mind cannot be reached by the senses. The spirit cannot be reached by the mind and the senses. It's beyond the reach of the mind and the senses. And it's understandable. Spirit is infinite, it's transcendent, and mind and the senses are material, perishable, limited. So they cannot go there. But the problem is, we don't have anything else. We just have body and mind. And if none of these go there, then what hope have we? Now the Upanishad in another place says, Manasa eva indriya grahyam, which means Manasa eva grahyam. That is, the supreme state can be grasped only by the mind. Now that's clearly a contradiction if you take it at the face value. One place the Upanishad says the mind cannot grasp it. In another Upanishad says the mind alone grasps it. Now when you have statement which looks so mutually contradictory, then we go to the wise ones and say, the commentators, and say, well, what is really meant? And Shankaracharya, when he comments on that portion of the text, says, Su samskritena manasa, only the mind which is completely purified. So the spirit can be grasped by the mind which is completely pure. And the first verse in this Upanishad pointed out, what does that purity of mind mean? It's freedom from desires. That is why Ramakrishna said, you'll find this occurs again and again in his conversations, the pure mind, pure intellect, and pure spirit are one and the same. So when they become completely pure, these kind of artificial distinctions we create between matter and non-matter and so on, everything gets resolved. There is no difference there. So the supreme state is neither to be thought of as graspable by the mind, but shouldn't be thought of as ungraspable by the mind. In other words, it cannot be grasped by the impure mind, it can be grasped by the pure mind. It should not be thought of as a kind of sense pleasure. Of course, a good meditation itself can be such pleasing, it brings so much joy. And of course, God realization oftentimes gets described in books as intense bliss, Satchit Ananda. Now that Ananda is not let me put it this way. The joy we get as a result of self-knowledge is different from the joy we get after eating, say, chocolate ice cream. And the reason is the joy that we get in life always comes from an object. If you love ice cream, and then the joy seems to come from the ice cream. And if you love ice cream and the ice cream isn't there, then there is no joy. But the joy that comes from the spirit, that supreme state, is not a joy that is coming from an object. That joy comes from just being. The joy comes from within. The joy of just being oneself. When that happens, then the attainment of Brahman, who is free from all bias. In Brahman, there are no distinctions. All compartments that we create in life, all the notions of good and bad, less and more, everything is absent in that supreme state. Verse 7. Svarena sandhayet yogam aswaram bhavayet param asvarena nubhavena bhavo va bhava ishyate. Practice concentration on the letters of Om and then meditate on Om beyond the letters. When the transcendent Om is experienced, non-being, that is Maya, is rooted in being, is realized. This is a big subject. We won't go into the detail. The Mandukya Upanishad, one of the Upanishads, goes very deeply into this analysis of this Om, and a lot of meditation prescribed there. So very briefly here, what we are asked first is to concentrate on the letters. Om is as a sound symbol, often said to be constituted of three sounds: A, U, and Ma. A, U, M. So sometimes people translate it into English as OM, but at a closer translation to the original sound would be AUM. It's like kind of thing. So the idea is you meditate first. So there are different meditations prescribed in books on the letter A, on the letter U, and the letter M. Sometimes identified with three states: waking, dream, and deep sleep. And it's a big subject. So what this verse points out is, first we must concentrate, focus on the letters, the three letters that constitute Om, and then meditate on Om beyond the letters, the sound itself beyond the letters. Now, when the transcendent Om is experienced, again, this is the deepest experience that occurs in the heart. Remember the three hearts I spoke to you about. At that time, non-being as rooted in being is realized. So even Maya as rooted in being means that this ignorance that is experienced, where is this ignorance rooted? And the answer is really, there is nothing else apart from Brahman. There is nothing else apart from that reality. So you have got to say that this ignorance is rooted in that reality. But that reality is of the nature of knowledge and ignorance. So how can ignorance be rooted in knowledge? It cannot be. It cannot be rooted in knowledge really. Can it be rooted in knowledge unreally? Well, unreally, anything is possible. That's the idea. Because Maya or ignorance is analogous to darkness. And knowledge is analogous to light. And what this is really saying is that light is rooted in, that darkness is rooted in light. Now, light and darkness are opposites. They cannot be together. So how can this darkness spring from light? And what is really being said is that it is not really rooted there. It is apparently rooted there. Again, it's a big subject, but we have had a chance to to discuss this on earlier occasions, and we'll have chances to discuss it in future occasions as well. Verse 8. Tadeva nishkalam brahma nirvikalpam niranjanam tad brahmaham iti jnatva brahma sampadyate dhruvam. That alone is Brahman, without parts, without distinctions, and without taint. Realizing I am that Brahman, the eternal Brahman is attained. So once we do that meditation, again, although here only the meditation on Om is described, this is not intended to convey the idea that without this you will not attain the highest. This is just one of the many meditations that you have. So whatever path your spiritual teacher has given you, whatever mantra or whatever method that has been given to you, that will ultimately take you through the same process. So do not think that this is something different from or in addition to what you are already doing in your own personal spiritual lives. So Brahman without parts. Again, there are things constituted of parts, and Brahman is without parts because the more parts there are, the simple law of any manufacturing law is the more movable parts there are, the more chances of breakdown. And so the less the movable parts, the better it is. And there are no parts, even better. Then there is nothing. Because the moment you have at least two things, those two things have to be joined together by something. And once that, whatever it is that keeps the two things together, it loosens, or this thing is going to come apart, and there's going to be a problem. Luckily, Brahman cannot come apart, no parts in it. In recent years, even the laptops or computers you had so many different parts. And then some years ago, Apple, for instance, started calling their casing for their laptops unibody. Unibody was, well, it's not like there are no separate moving parts, that there are, but they are minimizing the number of parts which need to be joined together. Because the more solid it is, the less chances of it moving, which is now even, for instance, solid state drives, SSDs are being preferred to the old-fashioned hard drives because the chances of solid state drives failing are less than the others. So the less the moving parts, the more lasting the product is. And so, of course, when no parts, think about it this way. Sometimes they say the amoeba, the unicellular creature, is technically immortal. Not really immortal, but technically, because it doesn't have any parts. So the only, if you want to speak of a death of an amoeba, a death of a unicellular creature, really, it just breaks up and becomes two cells. One amoeba becomes two amoebae. So in that sense, it hasn't really died. Well, I don't want to kind of drag this too further off. Again, without distinctions. Well, if it doesn't have parts, it could still have distinction. It could be one entity, but have different distinctions. Some parts could be thicker and some could be softer. Again, any distinction you have will affect its longevity. And so Brahman has no distinctions, no parts, and without taint. And taint means anything that lessens its power, lessens its vitality. And the reason is, there is nothing apart from Brahman. So there is nothing, Brahman has, by definition, has to be pure, because nothing can make Brahman impure, because there is nothing apart from Brahman. And any kind of a taint has to be something else falling into something else. But Brahman alone exists. That's why it's without taint. So when we realize that our true nature, that I'm not just this body, I'm not the mind, I'm none of these things, I'm not connected with anything, I am the infinite one, without parts, without distinction, without taint. I know this doesn't sound very romantic. It's like, how does it feel to be without parts and without... But think about this, that this is the most... If it is wonderful to live, what could be better than being one with life? If it is wonderful to be happy, what could be better than being just one with happiness? If it is wonderful to be conscious of things, what could be better than just being one with consciousness? So, the attaining of eternal Brahman really means knowing that I am existence itself. That it's not that I'm a conscious being, but I'm consciousness itself. It's not that things make me happy, but I'm happiness itself. So, it's not that I'm using the light to see things, I am that light. That's the idea. So we'll stop here today with verse number 8. If you have any thoughts, ideas, questions, yeah.
Swamiji, I have 3 questions. The first is, in our daily life, we sometimes, well, at least I compartmentalize to maintain some sanity. So, personal versus professional.
Sanity in a relative sense.
Yeah.
Because Vedanta would say the only sanity would be to know I'm infinite.
Yeah, relatively.
Okay.
Personal versus professional, romantic versus platonic, good versus bad. There's a compartmentalizing. There are parts that form. So what's the value of compartmentalizing when what we are hearing here is that parts actually leads to more opportunity for breakdown?
I think compartmentalizing is necessary in the beginning. I mean, at least for instance, we need to some kind of a mechanism for me to know this is good, this is bad. Now, ultimately, we have to transcend everything. That's true. But to reach that state of transcendence, I must first have the discernment of what is good, what is bad. So, I mean, one of the problems in the modern age is what they often call moral relativism. That there is nothing absolutely good, nothing absolutely bad. It all depends on the context. Not quite. I think we need to have some kind of a basic value system in order for us to then judge something is good, something is bad. Now, we don't have to impose it on others. but at least for one's own understanding. And for a spiritual seeker, for instance, from a Vedanta student, it would be that anything that helps me realize my true nature, anything that takes me in a theistic language, anything that takes me nearer to God, nearer to spirit is good. Anything that takes me away from it is bad. And that could be the criteria by which a spiritual seeker might say good or bad. Again, might work for that person, but not everyone has the same ideal in life, you see. So again, depending on the ideals we cherish, we form our own ideas of good and bad, and it will vary for that person. Now, that distinction is important, because once I'm able to distinguish good from bad, then I know what to do. How should I live in life? Then I should hold on to what is good, what is positive, what is strengthening. I should let go of everything that is negative, weakening. If I'm able to do that by this way of thinking in Vedanta, then I will have minimized all the things that make me weak, all the things that take me away from God. Now, when all this goodness that remains in me, now this goodness is not bad, but this goodness itself then can hold me down, because the ultimate reality is beyond good and bad. But I cannot transcend my goodness unless and until I have eliminated most of my wickedness. So that's the first stage. So compartmentalization is necessary. Then we choose the right compartment, destroy the wrong compartment, and then transcend the right compartment.
And then, Swamiji, you mentioned that we should say a positive no to negative desires and keep our emotions under check. How do we do that without suppressing emotions and desires?
We don't have to suppress, but we should have them under control. And the reason is that if I cannot control my emotions of happiness, I will not be able to control my emotion of pain, because the channels through which these emotions flow are the same. There isn't like separate nerves for expressing joy and separate. The nervous system is the same. And my favorite example is this, is something that's something I could see from the window of the Vedanta Society, was some years ago when the Red Sox reached almost the finals and lost in the finals. The fans were so upset that they all gathered here and they did so much damage in the Kenmore Square area. And the cops had to come, and there's a hell let loose there. Next year, they actually won the World Series after more than 80 years. And the fans were so happy, they went on a rampage and did a lot of destruction. Again, the cops came, and again, the order. Now, well, they two completely opposite things. They were terrified. I mean, they were mad that they lost, and the next year they were happy. But the end result was the same. Now, that's what happens when the emotions are not under control. So, even good emotions, no one is saying you should not be happy. I mean, of course, if you're happy, it's great. But keep your happiness also under check. In fact, sometimes in meditation, although this is a little bit going out of the subject, but that will briefly mention that sometimes if you are, some days it will happen to all of us that some days you are really having a good meditation. And when you are having a good meditation, it's a very joyful, pleasant experience. Now, let's say I'm meditating and I suddenly see, today I'm able to meditate. So I'm just enjoying it. The moment you become aware that you are having a good meditation and you begin to enjoy your own experience of meditation, actually meditation has stopped by then. So once that enjoyment starts, your meditation has stopped. I mean, you can still enjoy it, but it stopped. And so therefore, you should have a little bit of control, that even when you become aware of the thought that, today I'm meditating so well, don't think of it that time, because otherwise your meditation has already ended. And so emotions need to be kept under check. That's the thing. And as I also, one other thing, that as long as our emotions have not come under control, the path from positive, good emotions to negative, destructive emotion is a very short path. So sometimes when people let loose with some very high ecstatic thoughts of God, and it's very emotional. It's not from the spiritual heart. It's the emotional heart. So if I say, well, this is good emotions, why should I control it? So I kind of let them loose. And so the mind can go as quickly at this good, and it can kind of go and hit rock bottom at the same time, because even the negative emotions are present. Only when a person has succeeded in eliminating these negative, destructive, self-destructive emotions from the heart, then one has the freedom to not control the emotions or not, because then only good emotions remain. That's why when we see Ramakrishna or Chaitanya or some of these great devotee saints, they're just kind of singing ecstatically out of love for God. They could do it because their hearts had become completely pure. So their emotions could kind of just express itself even physically through the very graceful dance movements. But anyone else trying that, we kind of overactivate the emotional heart and have no control over it. You have no idea from which emotion to what emotion it will drag you. That's the idea. Okay. Anybody else? Yeah. There is an instance when in Belur Math, in the principal monastery of the order, when during Swami Vivekananda's time, a great disciple of Ramakrishna named Swami Shivananda, he and some other disciples of Ramakrishna were meditating in the shrine, along with some novices who had joined. So they were all sitting together and meditating. And this Swami Shivananda, in this meditation, his mind got so absorbed that tears started coming from his eyes. And Swami Vivekananda was sitting nearby. He noticed it. And then he goes very softly and tells Swami Shivananda, control it, hide your tears, hide, very softly. And so this is what we read in the book. And then we say, well, why? And the reason is simply this. Now, Swami Shivananda was a God-realized soul. His heart was completely pure. And so for him, to just this love for God that expressed itself, it just came. It wasn't like he willed the tears to come. They just came. The problem was, that time they were sitting in a group meditating, and some young novices were also sitting. And as we try to do in spiritual life, you look at people whom you admire, people whom you emulate, and when you see certain things happening in their lives, we also want to do the same thing. And so Vivekananda's concern was, when some of these young novices, they see this enlightened being sitting there with tears in the eyes, and it would give the impression that's the sign of spiritual progress. Tears should come from your eyes. And then, and people might then start measuring their own progress with how many tears come. And if tears don't come, they'll kind of will that. And it's not difficult. I mean, some good actors, if it's a very tragic scene, they can will the tears to come. You kind of put yourself in that frame of mind, and you can will the tears to come. And so, and again, this kind of forced discharge of tears by kind of artificially activating one's emotions does more harm than good. And so Vivekananda was concerned that looking at the Swami, others might feel, oh, that's what I should try to do. And so he just said, control it, control it. So that's what I mean by having these emotions under control. Although Shivananda himself didn't need to control, it was to set an example to the younger monks.
Swamiji, the opening up of the spiritual heart, is that a gradual process, or it's like binary, it just flips?
Again, there is no fixed timeline for this. In some, it can happen gradually. In some, it can happen suddenly. Having said that, I might go out on a limb and say that probably for majority it happens gradually. Sometimes the word that gets used, although not necessarily in exactly precisely this sense, is the word conversion. There's sudden conversion and gradual conversion. And sometimes you see in the lives of some people, their lives kind of change overnight. Suddenly, some kind of a major tsunami has occurred and they're like a different person. But in the case of most other people, it's kind of a daily chipping away at our weaknesses, and then gradually you begin to see light. So it at least feels like a gradual process. But when it happens, it feels as if it had happened suddenly. When you actually first sense it, even though you have had flashes of that opening a little bit, it's a whole new quantum leap, so to speak. And sometimes we see, I say gradual because sometimes in the course of our spiritual life, there are times, there are occasions when you look deeply and then when you're meditating, you might have a very clear seeing of the object of your meditation. Sometimes it that seeing may not last for more than a second or two. But at that moment, you know that you are not just imagining it. It's like a curtain opened and then was closed again. And it leaves such a deep impression that never again you will doubt, never again you will feel, maybe is this just imagination? You will never feel that way afterwards. Because you had this, even it's a kind of a very teeny-weeny glimpse, but you get that, and then actually it becomes even more painful after that. Because once you're kind of seen a little bit, then you want to see it again. And again, you never know. It can happen after a few days, a few months, God forbid, sometime after a few years. But if one keeps on persisting, then again it'll open for a second time and a third time. And then the frequency with which it opens, that kind of the curtain opens, keeps on increasing. Until at last, then it just gets open and never closes again. So in that sense, yes, it can be gradual.
And one just for follow-up question, Swamiji. Once the spiritual heart opens, is that equivalent to enlightenment? Because this...
No, it's
says the supreme state here.
Again, this everything is kind of put in a very condensed way. So opening of the heart itself is a very generic term. Now that can happen, as I said, the first is even to know. Sometimes we are told, meditate in your heart. But you close your eyes and you see darkness. It's like, so where exactly? And as I said, you kind of lightly touch, you'll have this feeling, you'll know more or less where it is. But it's still a very vague sensation. So opening of the heart in the most initial stage would mean that it's no longer vague. Your mind actually knows where to kind of attach itself. And then it just depends on when the curtain will open, how long it will open, and so on. Again, there is no fixed blueprint in everyone's case. In some cases, it might happen quicker. Again, because none of us has come with a clean slate. We have come with the past. We have come with the accumulated impressions, struggles of our past lives. And so our starting point is not same. And that's why it helps in spiritual life not to look at other people and say how much, you're not really competing with anybody else, because you are not even, your starting point is not same. You don't even know where they are. So it doesn't help to try to judge your progress by looking at others. It's much more helpful and healthy to judge your progress by looking at yourself, or what you are now as compared to what you were last year, or 5 years ago, or 10 years ago. That is a much more healthy way to judge progress. Yeah. Yeah.
Swamiji, is there anything called evolution of the mind here? Because when you think about the prehistoric man who sort of did not have this knowledge of attaining where we are privileged now to have that knowledge around us, to be able to talk about it, understand from spiritual teachers. Is there something which is sort of that evolution that takes place of a mind itself?
Evolution, you could say, in terms of that particular individual, but you are just seeing in a kind of a generic sense.
Yeah.
Well, it's a big subject, but there may not be any generic thing at all. You know, it's like the world that you see is an object of your perception. So that would make sense if the many that you see have an absolute independent existence, independent of you. Then you can speak about the generic evolution. But really, everything that you see depends on you. If your eyes shut, everything ends. When you go to sleep, this world ends. So you are not really sure whether the world exists apart from your perception of it. Yeah. Vivek?
Pranam Swamiji, is this spiritual heart related at all to what's described in Raja Yoga as the heart center, the mystical heart center, the fourth chakra, as it were?
That's right, yes. It often gets described in yoga books as the heart center. Yeah.
Piggybacking on the last question, I went to a workshop a while ago on the Hrit Padma, and I was kind of wondering when you were talking about the spiritual heart, if that's what it was, but that's different from the fourth chakra.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to go into too many technicalities about it, but again, it's because the framework in yoga, the framework is slightly different from the way described in Vedanta. Although there are kind of correlates, it's not exactly identical, but it's more or less in the same area and has some similarities.
Now, was it Sri Ramakrishna who said the foolish person has a heart on the left and the wise person has a heart on the right?
Krishna said that?
No. I'm asking, was it Sri Ramakrishna? I'm not sure if it was Sri Ramakrishna or not.
No. I mean, heart to the left and right, that can only appear to the physiological heart. I mean, other hearts are so subtle. There's what right, left, it's very difficult to say that, yeah.
So, Swamiji, does realization happen through the heart or the mind or neither or both?
Say that again?
Realization, will it happen through the heart or the mind or both of them or neither?
Well, it will happen to whom? Who is the one who realizes? Well, the answer is one who has not realized will realize, right? It's like who experiences freedom? The one who is in bondage. Now, who is in bondage? If you take the individual constituents apart, it's very difficult to know. The body and mind, you cannot say they are in bondage because it's that dead matter anyway. And the spirit is always free. So that is why the verse later on will say there is no bondage, there is no freedom. So all that you could say is the Atman, the spirit, which was deluded, under the deluded state, the spirit thinks of itself in bondage, and it is that spirit which thought of itself as deluded, then knows that it is not in bondage. That's how it is, yeah.
So the word Brahman has been stated there a couple of times. So I was just wondering, what's the difference between Brahman and Brahmand?
Brahman and Brahmand?
Yeah.
Well, Brahmand actually, Anda is really egg. And Brahmanda is literally translated to Brahma, egg. It doesn't make sense. So that's the word often gets used to refer to the universe, like a cosmic womb that this whole universe has come. And Brahman is a different term. It means the infinite, and it often gets used in the Vedanta text as referring to that infinite reality which alone exists. So they are two different things.
A second question. So like you talked about basically distincting between like good and bad desires. How do you draw like the objective distinction between what is good and what is bad?
Again, one way you could make that distinction is that anything that will help take me to closer to the goal of my life is good. Anything that will take me away from the goal of my life is bad. That's in a very general sense, because then whatever that goal of life can be. And in spiritual sense, it would be anything that takes me nearer to God or nearer to spirit is good. Anything that makes me forget God or forget the spirit is bad. Okay, so we stop here today, and when we meet next week, we'll begin with verse number 9. Om Jananim Saratam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhurmuhu. On Sunday, 9th, happens to be the Guru Purnima, and we'll have our annual celebration of the Guru Purnima. As we did last week, last Sunday, we'll have 11 o'clock, we'll have a short worship, music, and then a reflection on the role of Guru in spiritual life. We'll have prayer, meditation, and then we'll have potluck lunch. That's the program for Sunday. 11 o'clock we begin and probably should end around 1 o'clock or so. On Saturday, we will not have meditation, so that all of you will have enough time to cook for next day. So we'll meet next on Sunday. Next Wednesday, we will continue with the study of the Upanishad as usual. Let's conclude with a prayer now on page 3. May the Divine Being, who is the Father in heaven of the Christians, Holy One of the Jewish faith, Allah of the Muslims, Buddha of the Buddhists, Tao of the Taoists, Ahura Mazda of the Zoroastrians, the Great Spirit of the Native Americans, and Brahman of the Hindus, lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May we be granted strength, freedom, and clear understanding. May we learn to see God in our own hearts and in everyone around us. May God bless us all and fill our hearts with gratitude, grace, and love. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.